you're going to have leakage of those very vaccines into the organs. Now you have to realize, guys, that your vest system is the most intricate system of tunnels in existence. And that system is completely, it's not possible. Large molecules and viruses can't get past that barrier. Your walls are sealed, actually. But if you go around making holes in the walls, then they get out. Then they get to the heart muscle cell and the brain cells and the liver cells and whatever cells that happen to be attacked. But because these packages are in the whole circulation, they reach all the organs of your body, everywhere. Now, this is a microcast of the microvasculature of the human brain, adult. Your brain consumes 20% of the oxygen of the body. And capillaries are so wonderfully, intricately integrated within the brain material. If each capillary is feeding, I don't know how many cells, but those cells are dependent on the circulation. If a clot forms in these capillaries, if something happens to the capillaries, those cells that are being fed are going to die. Now, you know how wonderful our brain is. Nature, God, someone gave it to the human being. And each area of your brain is responsible for something else. One is responsible for recognition, for memory, for movement, for your psyche, for empathy, for your personality. No one really knows where what is, okay? But I can tell you, dementia, Alzheimer, is associated with, very often associated with microclots and micronecrosis in the frontal brain. It's very typical. But of course, there's also an area that if you knock it out, you get jerks, Huntington disease, you know. So you cannot afford to clog any single capillary in the brain. If you do this, there is going to be consequences that are irreversible because the brain, the heart is similar, by the way. The heart consumes 10% of oxygen, and the athletes, you know, I saw tennis yesterday, then the heart consumes over 80% of the oxygen. And each of these capillaries in the heart is responsible for feeding myocardial tissue. And if that dies, it is the second organ that cannot repair the lesions. It's dead for life. Imagine. Now, we said over 2 years ago, it has to be feared that these spike proteins, of course, will be appearing then on the vessel wall, and that will seed the roots for thrombosis and for leakage. Can this be shown? Well, let me tell you that there's a paper now in preparation by a very, very wonderful pathologist whose name is not mentioned here on purpose. He does not want his name mentioned. The paper is not yet published officially. What he found was something so startling and so unique that I said, I'm going to use this chance to show it to you. So what he found was, there was a man deceased after the 3rd vaccination, and no one knew what he had died from. And the pathology looked at his brain. And what he found was listen very carefully, multifocal means at many points in the brain, many. Necrotizing means dying and dead. Encephalitis. This is something that has been reported about 10 times in the world literature following infection by the flu, influenza. But never otherwise. This case is the first case where clearly it is not the flu. and it is also not corona. It is the spike protein, okay? Because he found on the endothelial cells of the capillaries. Now, Marguerite is also sitting here, Marguerite. She will say it's true. You know, capillary thrombosis is something that is not known in the brain. It doesn't happen. But here, it's the capillaries. And when they are closed, the cells die. There's no way to get out of this. No way.
So I was not expecting to find what I'm about to say, which is that clearly what the damage being done, probably the most important damage being done, the two things are the deaths and the infertility. Now, that is a program. Nearly all the globalists, whether it's Bill Gates or whether it's even Fauci has talked this way in so-called scientific articles, or Klaus Schwab, or Xi Jinping from important part. So we have infertility and we have actually culling. But there's another aspect of brain damage now when you get into the brain, and that is conformity and docility. Mm-hmm. So when they finally got around to doing detailed studies of lobotomy, one of the ways that they put it, and these were the people who favored lobotomy, they said the person in a controlled, confined situation does reasonably well. That is, they're manageable, they don't get out of control, they can be led about, they will line up and get their dinners. They do not get they'll get irritable, but they don't have the energy to do a criminal act or the energy or planning to really get into serious trouble. Walter Friedman bragged about that. He said, you know, these stories of bank robbers by lobotomized people, why they don't have the ability to plan or the energy or the concern. Very proudly about what they're doing to human beings. Now, what is better for totalitarian mass than producing docility, lack of being able to plan anything, that like a rebellion? So to the extent they anticipated a brain damage, a generalized brain damage reaction, docility is, that's such a big part of it. And one of the things I noticed immediately, because I got to see a lot of lobotomized patients. It was 1954 to 58 that I was in college. And I got to see shock treatment and insulin coma treatment, because I would just walk in and I was recognizable. People thought I'd been given the keys. I just didn't return them one night and nobody complained. And what I noticed was very, very apparent to me as a college, by now maybe a sophomore when I'm really, really active. And that is that when the person would be led in, say, to the insulin coma, which is simply giving you an injection of insulin sufficient to deprive your brain of enough sugar to kill you, that one of the basic things that I could see was that people came in as human beings. Mm-hmm. They were angry, most of them, upset. They didn't want to be in this place. They would certainly be irritable. They'd be difficult to handle. And then they'd get knocked out by the insulin. They'd go into seizures. They were literally dying. And then they'd be given sugar or water or orange juice with extra sugar, and they'd come out of it. And now they were not just docile. They were grateful for having their lives saved. They were completely helpless, docile people. And that was the goal. So I knew from the beginning that all the other things they were saying about biochemical imbalances or improving their mental health was all nonsense. This was a total institution, very similar to an extermination camp. They were just having their way with these people, making them more amenable. And then the same story when the psych drugs came in, the big antipsychotics, which came in the 50s. I got to see some of their effects. One dose produced somebody similar to somebody who'd been abused in a concentration camp. One dose made people docile. And as Naomi mentioned, this occurs through the destruction or at least increasing dysfunctionality in the frontal lobes of the brain. But the brain's also